Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video giving you the smorgasbord of tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. So much to talk about. I've been away for a day, so this is like, where do I start? So many topics. I'm going to start with Dmitry from War Translated, who I'm still to interview. I'm due to interview him at some point, but haven't got around to sorting that out. Says 14 months in, Russian volunteer Anastasia Kasharova suddenly found that Russian morale is low because Russian soldiers have no idea what they're fighting for. Something I've said for a long time. Indeed, Igor Gherkin, one of the things he found when he went to the front line, when he volunteered to actually go to the front line before kind of being sent back, the paperwork didn't sort of go through, and he experienced the front line as someone who previously was in charge of militia troops in the 2014 Little Green Men campaign. Now as a ultra-nationalist Russian blogger that's critical of the Russian MOD and is liable to be falling out of a window anytime soon. I believe the pressure is mounting on him. But anyway, Igor Gherkin said that one of the things he found on the front line was that the men didn't know what they're fighting for. The Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. They got morale, which is a force multiplier, but they're fighting for their homeland, their friends, their families, their houses, their country, their identity, their national identity, everything. Or the really positive kind of scenario where they are fighting for something. The Russian soldiers, mobilized soldiers who aren't even there voluntarily, don't know what they're fighting for. Like, why are we here? What is the point of this? What we don't really we don't get it, and therefore there's a real lacking in the Russian troops, in that drive and that motivation. You know, for a lot of them, the convicts say in the Bakhmut area fighting for Wagner, it's for self-preservation. You know, if we go forward, we might die, but we might survive if we win. If we run backwards, we're going to get shot by our barrow troops, or we're going to get stuff dropped on our heads by IEDs if we stay here. So let's run forward, and it's kind of like we are attacking as a form of self-preservation. Seems weird, but that's a scenario. But other than that, you know, there's no kind of like, yeah, let's go and do this, guys. There's no camaraderie unified around a common goal, a common positive vision of their future. Anyway, enough preamble. The quote is, on 500, desertion and morale. I, as a law-abiding citizen and state supporter, do not stand for the cruelty of punishment, but for the inevitability of punishment. Let me explain. Each time we increase the punishment for a certain crime, we prevent it for a while, but then it comes back. For example, every day a soldier is on the verge of life and death. Even if you give him the death penalty for desertion, there is only one outcome for him. Moreover, the punishment for those who ran and chickened out, and for those who want to fight for the country but are sent with a machine gun against an enemy artillery, is identical. Or he could be considered a deserter while the other one brought himself a certificate and is calmly chilling in the hospital. The issue is not the immorality of people, but the immorality of the system itself. I mean, it's quite problematic when you use the term chickened out for this situation. Like, it's hardly chickening out not to get shot to pieces in a conflict you're not like mentally engaged in. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, one, there is no ideology. Everyone finds for himself what he is fighting for. Hochos, Ukrainians, I mean, that's their really offensive term for them, have everything primitive and ingeniously simple. You are the aggressors. We are fighting for our lands. We didn't bring an opposing idea. 2, the system of punishments and rewards does not work, and what exists is not always fair. The state tells very little about the exploits of our guys. Sometimes those who drank and behaved hypocritically are rewarded, or those who had nothing to do with the heroic deed at all, but the command likes them because they curried favor with them. 3, the state promised one thing, but reality is different. Issues with payments have not yet been resolved. Contractors and volunteers are constantly fighting for their allotted funds. That is, the guys aren't fighting, but engaging in bureaucracy, fighting against a well-fed bureaucracy, and thinking whether their children will die of hunger or not. 4, generally, the respect of an individual by the authorities. Often we see commanders and some generals who behave inappropriately, not according to the charter, insulting the soldiers. 5, there are no rotations yet. The guys sit for several months in the trenches. They are losing their minds and are depressed, while others are sitting in arrears, drinking and selling equipment that the volunteers brought. What kind of fighting spirit and sacrifice can we talk about? I think that's absolutely fascinating insight, and it's something that's been borne out by an awful lot of intercepted telephone calls, an awful lot of POWs being interviewed about this. There's another one recently, in fact. I'll see if I can dig that out now. It'd be a good time to bring that in. Here it is. So it's by Dimitri again, War Translated, and I'll read it to you for those who are listening and not viewing this. So there's a video of a Russian prisoner of war. In this, he actually looks relatively happy that he's been captured. To be honest, he said he gives his name. Born in 1989 from Kazan. Interestingly, the place where a military base. There was a big explosion yesterday, and there's a grass fire around there. And he continues, upon mobilization, I ended up with the 111th Regiment, 1st Battalion, 2nd Company. So you verify who this guy is. They said to us, the mobilized, that we will be standing at the border in the third line, but we're sent to the front line. This is a really common complaint from mobilized soldiers, that they are promised to be basically territorial defense type thing. You are the reserves, you'll be in the third echelon, you won't be fighting, and they go, okay, given minimal training and then thrown onto the front line. And they're like, they are sent. And in fact, what he says here is what we've heard plenty of times before, which is the locals say in the DNR or LNR, Donetsk People's Republic, Luhansk People's Republic forces, who are kind of more local to the area, are much more likely to send mobilized to the front line because they don't want to kill themselves in this battle that they feel to some extent, or this war that to some extent has been thrust upon them, kind of locally speaking. So they're much more likely to send in the mobilized kind of reserves or reinforcements that be sent their way and keep their own localized troops back. So this guy continues. But the locals for some reason are not being sent. And we had this incident. We were returning from the 0 line, and standing behind a garage was a platoon commander and a local mobilized. They were, how should I say, they were participating in a ham shandy, and we looked on in awe. So a bit of self-pleasure. They noticed us, grabbed us. They noticed and grabbed us and said, if we tell anyone, we'll go as stormtroopers. I didn't tell anyone, but still, after 2 days, was still sent to the assault brigade. And 2 days later, I got captured. So I wanted to tell this story. And that's pretty much the story. So to the guys you're fighting against, thanks to everyone, he says there. So, and at the end, I'd imagine that situation, the best way out of this situation is to be captured. It's got genuinely, like in some of these scenarios, think about Bakhmut, where, as I've said before, dead if I go back, dead if I stay here, almost certainly dead if I go forward. So I'm going to go forward, and fingers crossed, because if we succeed in taking that position, right, then I'm at that same scenario again. Right, the next day, what's the scenario? Dead if I go back, dead if I stay here, got to go forward. But eventually, percentage-wise, you are going to die. If in each time you succeed in going forward, at some point you're going to not succeed and get shot and get killed, or be one of the casualties in a successful attack or whatever. Really, the only way out of that, how do you get out of this? You can't desert getting captured and hopefully being treated well by the Ukrainian captors. So this guy, the fact that he's smiling here, I can absolutely understand that 100%. It's like that is the very best outcome for someone who's been mobilized and chucked into this war and being given a machine gun and said, right, go for it, mate. Good luck. There ain't any coming back. So, just go forward and keep going type thing. I know it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you get the point. Right, on something completely different now. It is, if the estimates are true, this is really important. And I was talking this morning about the fantastic provision of M109L self-propelled howitzers from Italy, and saying the problem is that providing all these new SPGs, that's great. but they don't have the artillery they don't have, sorry, the ammunition to feed into these guns. So, there's this problem that being given plenty of pieces of artillery, and then 19 Caesars and this and then that, but they don't have the shots the shells to fire, and so therefore the shells per piece is reduced. Now, many people came on and said, no, these will be primarily replacing worn out guns that have either been destroyed themselves or need to go back to have their barrels fixed. That's absolutely true, and I was really oversimplifying the issue. I still think that is an issue, uh, but they definitely need the gun. It's not like they don't need the self-propelled howitzers. It'd be super useful, and the 33 AS90s from the UK, of course. So realistically, they've got suddenly a good 150 plus self-propelled howitzers, and that's not to talk about all the other, towed howitzers and things they might be getting as well. But they will be replacing a lot of worn-out pieces that will then, I presume, be sent back to Poland, the western part of Ukraine, elsewhere to get fixed up. Well, if the estimates are true, the Russian industry have to work hard to provide enough barrels for all these units. So they've got 1,630 tanks, 4,220 armored vehicles, 2,950 artillery systems. You can manufacture light barrels massively, but heavy barrels need investment and some dedicated lines. Artillery barrels have a life of 4,000 to 6,000 fires, but for tanks, the number would be 350 to 1,200. For example, no less than 50% of the Russian tank inventory still uses a 2A46 barrel. T64A, T72A, T64B, T80B. Some Ukrainian tanks also use it. It has a life of 800 EFC, or 250 rounds of APF SDS, if new. So if you've got a new tank with this barrel, or relatively new barrel, then you can expect to fire 800 regular rounds, or 250 more upgraded rounds. And that's obviously, it's not huge considering this has been going on for 400 days. So that's like 2 rounds a day, and then that's finished. But you're going to have a tank on the front line. It's going to be firing, dozens of rounds a day if it's engaged in active duty. So the logistic issue: tanks using a 2A46 gun can't change the barrels without dismantling the turret. Sometimes they're very far from bases and the tank must be abandoned. So we've seen an awful lot of abandoned tanks, and one of the reasons might be not only that they've run out of fuel, can't get any fuel, there's no fuel provision around, but also the track might have gone, but also the barrel might have gone. And what's the point driving around a tank that can't fire or is incredibly inaccurate due to kind of worn out barrels? Not different for the 2A20 or the D10T, which are on a T55 or T62s. These two with a considerably shorter life. There is another situation. After 100 to 200 rounds, the gun still fires, but due to wear in the barrel, the rounds won't be so accurate or as long ranged. Old ammo does accelerate this as well, and they're being given old ammunition stocks for sure. This same situation is with Ukrainian tanks too, so probably due to this, both sides avoid tank fights. The situation isn't different with armored vehicles. Most of the 30mm autocannons working with the 2A42 have a life of 5,000 to 6,000 fires, but the cannon has a rate of 360 rounds a minute. You can imagine that there are many barrels necessary per day for thousands of deployed armored vehicles. That's a really good point I hadn't thought about before. I have thought about tank barrels, but of course autocannon barrels are firing, and I've seen one that's heated up and has basically caught fire. It was firing so much and big time smoking. Just these are firing loads of rounds repeatedly, and that will cause incredible stress on those barrels. So about the artillery, if Russia is firing 15,000 to 20,000 rounds daily, they need 4 guns every day. But usually an army exchanges barrels before 2,000 rounds to keep at least some accuracy. So maybe 50 artillery barrels are needed every week. If months ago they were firing 60,000 rounds a day, that's 100 to 140 barrels per week for artillery. I've no doubts that Russians have serious issues with gun barrels. The same problem took out a third of Ukrainian 155 artillery some time ago. Producing heavy barrels takes time. Russia needs to make barrels for new, refurbished, uh, and to replace the battlefield. So, sorry, the English isn't obviously the first language here. So, they need to make a lot of new barrels, or to replace the ones that are worn out, and that means many thousands. So recently, Ultra Gonzavod, which is one of the Ukrainian, no, that's the Russian manufacturer, got an order to manufacture some 2A82 barrels and took some months to deliver. Absolutely, barrels can be a limitation to keep the battlefield. I don't know exactly the capacity of the Russian industry to produce barrels, but I can see the growth in demand. Apologies for some of the English there, so it sounded like I was butchering what he's trying to say, but that's really great thread there, really important. And the Russian barrels must be presenting quite a challenge for the Russians. I mean, their logistics are problematic at the best of times, but you throw in needing to replace entire like turrets, or barrels, but removing the turret to do that on tanks or towed pieces or SPGs, needing to replace that many per week, per month. It's a really big challenge. Of course, that's the same for the Ukrainians, but arguably they have greater ability to do that given the support they're receiving from so many other nations. Right, let's go to talk about the Westland WS-61 Sea King helicopter sent by the UK. This has already entered into active service with the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The UK has pledged to send 3 Westland Sea King helicopters to Ukraine, which will primarily be operated by utility helicopters. I was talking to my mate. My mate used to fly these, and he came down. He's now he now flies air sea rescue up in the Shetland Islands, actually. But he was talking about his experiences flying these. He flew Lynxes in Afghanistan, so on and so forth. He's flown a whole bunch of helicopters. He's just wondering where exactly the UK got these from, because he wasn't aware that we kept any of them, really. But they're hanging around in warehouses, I guess, in places. But there's a really interesting BBC article here that for those British people out there who know the Sea King, it's one of our kind of workhorse helicopters that has been around for eons, it seems, is now out of service, but 3 of them being used in Ukraine. So let's dip into the article a little bit. So let's see what it has to say. I mean, personally, I live by the coast. I live really close to what is now not naval, but used to be a naval air base on the coast. And I used to see Sea Kings flying all the time in air sea rescue capacity, but also when it was a naval airbase. But there you go. Despite its age, the Ukrainian military says the aircraft will help in the war against Russia. Despite this, the 4-man crew is enjoying showing off the new helicopter. They tell us how important it is for them on the battlefield, where it is used for rescuing casualties, moving troops, and carrying out reconnaissance. It goes on later to say, instead, the UK chose to give these two, so 2 of them are out there now. One of them is still being fixed up to be sent. It's in the south of England at the moment. So instead, the UK chose to give them 2 helicopters that do not carry any weapons or fly particularly fast, and which are no longer used by the Royal Navy, which pensioned the Sea Kings off several years ago. One of them is so old that it even saw service during the Falklands War conflict back in 1982, where it played a historic role. So the idea is that the UK hasn't given Typhoon fighters, hasn't given anything, with offensive capabilities, just given them 3 old Sea Kings, but these are still doing a useful job. The answer to the choice of aircraft can also be found partly here in Ukraine. The crew are clearly passionate about their new helicopter. Co-pilot Vasil says the Sea King was just what the Ukrainian Navy needed, a practical, reliable aircraft that can do whatever is asked of it. Quote, I like this helicopter because it's incredibly good for flying, Vasil says. It's one of the best for combat operations, whether transferring equipment or carrying out search and rescue. It's easy to fly even in difficult conditions. The Sea Kings are being used to pick up casualties and needing urgent medical help, move special forces into position, and fetch and carry equipment. Vasil says one key task is searching for downed pilots, which can involve flying behind enemy lines. Quote, pilots have to eject, he says. They need to be rescued. For this, we have to reach territory which is not possible not under Ukrainian control. He also emphasizes that the Sea Kings are of a similar age to several other helicopters used by Ukrainian armed forces. As such, he and other pilots are familiar with the aircraft of that vintage, making their training easier. It is spacious, it is good, it has good load capacity, and it is economical, Vasil adds. One engineer, Ihor, tells me that the Sea Kings are in fact mostly new, with very little of the original helicopter remaining. They are old, he says, but they have gone through modernization and we need them very much. I believe this is just the start of our work together. There's this talk about one of the actual ones that is out there in Ukraine was used in the Falklands conflict. This one was used to transfer the commander of the land forces to negotiate the Argentine surrender. Indeed, so the quote is here: "No other aircraft could fly due to the bad weather, but the Sea King could." So these Sea Kings may be old, but they may be few in number, and they may not be the fixed-wing aircraft Kyiv wants to help turn the military balance, but the Navy in Ukraine says it's happy to have them, and it wants more. There are other Sea Kings in storage in the UK, and if the government decided to give them to Ukraine, the crew and engineers we spoke to said they would be more than welcome. So that's really good news. It's good that I'm a big fan, as I've said before, of recycling. There's definitely positive to be able to give them to the Ukrainians. Yes, it's not going to help them in their offensive capabilities, at least not in a kind of prima facie way, but they are of use, and if we can give more, I think we should. Right, moving on to artillery ammunition again, but of a different sort. This looks like it's a use of smart rounds. I'll explain what a smart round is. So this is two vehicles being hit in one artillery shot, and you'll be pleased to know with added music. So it's not very good footage here. It's wiggling around quite a lot, but there are two. I'll show you the beginning of the video again. So you've basically got two tanks by the looks of it that are there, and as it moves. No, not those two that hit. Actually, two other pieces of equipment that were hit. And this is with one. Oh, they're the two tanks there. Two hits here, as it says. So maybe several of these rounds are sent off. I'll explain these in a minute. And they're those two taken out in one shot. But there's talk here of the use of smart rounds. So what are smart rounds? Well, smart rounds, it says it's old footage, but genuine. I thought it was just interesting to talk about this. So smart rounds, Smart 155 is a German 155 mil artillery round designed for long-range indirect fire top attack role against armored vehicles. The projectile was developed all the way back in 1989, and then Rheinmetall has done sort of full-scale production of these. And actually, I think they're used by Americans as well. Anyway, the idea is there are two submunitions inside the round. The round comes apart in midair, and then these two submunitions find their target and blow it up, or blow two targets up. So Smart 155 is a 155 mil NATO artillery round designed to be fired from the Panzer Howitzer 2000 and the M109 howitzers, including the Paladin variant. It consists of a 47 kilogram heavy artillery projectile containing two autonomous sensor-fused fire and forget submunitions. So fire and forget means you fire it and forget. You can then start driving off. You fired it. You don't need to aim it in, it just does it all itself. Submunitions each contain a high penetration EFP warhead for use against heavy armored fighting vehicles, such as main battle tanks. The EFP warhead uses a heavy metal liner. After the submunition is released, it opens a parachute. While slowly descending, the submunition rotates, scanning the area below with its infrared sensor and a millimeter wave radar. Utilization of several types of sensors allows Smart 155 to be used in all terrain types and weather conditions. And here you can see it's fired from the standard artillery tube. The round flies on a ballistic arc, which you can see there, with a range of 27.5 kilometers. Mid-flight, a timer fuse ignites a small ejector rocket in the nose, which drags the two submunitions out of the shell casing. And there are these two purple things here. Once clear of the shell, the submunitions fall toward the target. The shell and the nose assembly fall away. The submunitions deploy parachutes and independently corkscrew down over the subject area, scanning for targets. Once the submunition detects a target vehicle beneath it, it detonates its explosive payload. This creates a high-velocity, explosively formed projectile which strikes the target vehicle from above, where the armor is relatively weak, for maximum effect. Okay, so used by a number of people around the world. Let's see this in an old 4x3 bit of video here, because some of my early YouTube videos were in this dimension. That's how long I've been doing this, although no one watched back then because I was talking about stuff that no one cares about. Anyway.
Each round carries 2 smart submunitions. As it passes over the target area, the submunitions are ejected from the shell. Once dispensed, they deploy spin-stabilizing wings and, using infrared sensors, begin to hunt out enemy armored vehicles. Bonus rounds work by delivering an explosively formed projectile warhead, or EFP.
Which is to say that they don't parachute down. There's that explosion, as was mentioned before, that takes place up there that then fires the round downwards once it's found its target.
Once the warheads penetrate, all targets inside, including equipment, are effectively destroyed.
So there you go. That's what the smart round does, and you can imagine it's fairly useful for the Ukrainians here. Haven't seen too much footage of it, but that is supposedly a bit of footage, not the greatest footage, to show that that's being used. There have also been fragments of these found on the battlefield, actually, for some time now. Quite early on last year, there were some that were found by Russians to indicate that the Ukrainians were indeed using these not too far into the war. Right, this is a bit of footage, but I don't think it is what it claims it is. So Trent Telenko says, I've been waiting for this video to surface. Anton Gerashchenko says, it is reported this video shows, and he's a Ukrainian patriot, advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs in Ukraine, founder of the Institute of the Future, official enemy of Russian propaganda. It is reported that this video shows the launch of the 2 Neptune cruise missiles that destroyed Russian flagship Moskva cruiser. The video was published by Alexander Turchinov, former Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. However, other people have said, well, actually, this video seems to be in the daytime. It's not crazy stormy, and when the Moskva went down, I think the missiles were shot at night and it was pretty stormy. So I doubt these are the missiles that were sent at the Moskva. However, it's it's a little bit windy. It could be, but this is quite rare to see footage of the Neptunes, and one would assume so on and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know that they were the actual missiles. It's unlikely they're going to be using those missiles for testing. They're not going to have too many of them, so I assume that was fired in a military capacity. Nonetheless, whatever the reality of that footage is, the Neptunes are useful. So they're designed based on the KH-31 subsonic anti-ship missile with substantially improved range, targeting, and electronics equipment. The system requirement was for a single missile to defeat surface warships and transport vessels with a displacement of up to 5,000 tons, either in convoys or moving individually. They entered service only in March 2021, so they are relatively new missiles. What does it say here? The operational range is up to 280 kilometers, and it is subsonic speed, so it doesn't go as fast as the speed of sound. I don't know how easy they would be to shoot out the sky, but you get the idea. Useful bits of kit. Right, let's do a Thomas Tyner artillery type. Well, no, another artillery thread. Let's talk mortars. I've not talked too much about mortars myself. Who invented them? What types exist in NATO's arsenal? How they work, and how the modern battlefield will change their use. That's a mortar. As we understand it, you can get self-propelled mortars, ones that drive along themselves. Before continuing, please read my earlier thread about how M777 howitzer works. I can't even remember if I've shared that with you. Mortars and howitzers both use a combination of projectile, fuse charge, and primer. And if you know the basics of the M777 operation, then you will easily understand this thread. Or perhaps I will. Do you know what? I better do that one. When did he release that? 16th of May 2022. I wouldn't have done that because this is going back last year. Let's do this one before we do the mortar one. Okay, sorry about that. The M777 is a towed 155mm howitzer with a gun crew of 8 soldiers or 10 Marines. There is a whole lot of battery and battery-fired direction center FDC stuff that I will skip to focus on the operation of one M777. When a fire mission is received, a battery's M777 guns move to their firing positions. Upon arrival, half of the M777's crew emplaces the gun, which means shoveling holes for the gun's spurs, raising the barrel, etc. The less the gun moves after firing, the faster the crew can fire the next projectile, so the spurs are buried deep in the earth. And you can imagine, those are pretty significant pieces of kit to dig for. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew prepares the projectiles. Projectiles are transported with a lifting plug instead of a fuse. A crew only prepares the projectiles for the current fire mission. Nothing worse than having to remove a fuse when you want to escape counter battery fire. So rather than get, too many of these ready just in case you might fire a bit later, you get the bare minimum ready because you might need to scoot out of there as quickly as possible. So there you go. Right, next step, unscrew the lifting plug and screw in the fuse. There are a lot of fuses. Point detonating, super quick. Delay, time, point detonating, super quick. Delay, time, variable time, proximity, etc. In this photo, M739 fuses, point detonating, are used. So point detonating means that, they will hit and detonate as they hit. With the projectiles ready, it is time to unload the charges. The charges propel the projectiles out of the barrel and towards the enemy. The M777 uses a modular artillery charge system, or MAX, which comes in 2 colours, green and white. M231, green, 1 or 2 charges for distances between 3 to 13 kilometers, and then M232A1, white, 3, 4, or 5 charges for distances between 7 and 24 kilometers with standard projectiles, 8 to 30 kilometers base bleed projectiles. So those are projectiles that then bleed out, I think, gas out the back and have fins to do, give you an extra bit of range. Max is also compatible with the Panzer Howitzer 2000 and the FH70, both of which Ukraine is receiving too. Now, this is obviously back in May. They've long had those. What is still missing are the primers. So you've got the charges, the projectiles, and now you need the primers. Here we have an enthusiastic Australian Army loader with 4 M232A1 charges and 7 M82 primers in his vest. So he's got the charges there and then the primers here in his vest. The M82 is a cartridge that, when struck, will ignite the charges. No primer, no fire. Right, so if these don't ignite, you're not going to get an explosion to thrust the projectile out of the barrel. Inserting each primer on its own would slow the gun crew down. So the primers are loaded into a magazine that sits in the back of the breech. In the photo, we see an uploaded magazine with a blue stripe. So that is the magazine that has the primers in it. The M777 is in place, the projectiles are ready, the charges are laid out, the primers are loaded. Time to sight the gun. First mount the optical sights, then adjust elevation and deflection to ensure the projectile hits where it is intended to hit. If you're using if you're using a proximity or time fuse, then the projectile will detonate above the ground, but only if you set the correct time or height. Older fuses are, so if you think about if you get it wrong, it's a bit like Die Hard 2, where they set the ground level incorrectly for the plane, so the plane thinks it's going to come down and land, but actually the ground is up here and it explodes and hits the runway. Random parallel there, but the idea is if you set all the stuff wrong, the proximity fuse wrong or the time fuse wrong, then it's going to explode either far too early or too late and just go hit the ground, and it might be sort of dud. It might do absolutely no damage. Older fuses were set by hand. Modern fuses by the PIAFS fuse setter, here used with M762 electronic time fuses. So there you go. He's setting it there with a piece of machinery. So time to make some noise. First, throw the projectile onto the loading tray, which will be lowered and align the projectile with the barrel. Now ram the projectile into the barrel until it is stuck, so it doesn't slide back, and so that there is room for the charges. So there they are, ramming it in. Bish bash bosh. Time to load the charges. Yell what charges you load and show the charges to the rest of the gun crew, because if you use too many or too few, the projectile will fall short or overshoot. If it is all correct, then push the charges into the barrel. Interesting. If you load more than one charge, use the loading tray. If you load 4 or 5 charges, use a charge sleeve. Place that on the loading tray, then push the charges in. Don't forget to toss the charge sleeve theatrically away. So there you go. They're loading a couple in. It looks like there's a sleeve with all the charges in, and then throw that away. Job done. The loading tray is pushed back up, and the charge loader closes the breech. Only he is allowed to touch the breech mechanism, because when he loads the charges, he sticks his hand into the barrel, and if at that moment the breech comes down, his hand is gone. Almost there. Once more, the gunner and the assistant gunner check the gun's elevation and deflection, correct them if necessary, then report to the gun section chief, and that everything is ready. The charge loader is then ordered to push a lever to load the M82 primer, and the soldier operating the loading tray will now hook up the lanyard. Pulling the lanyard will strike the primer, which will ignite the charges, which will propel the projectile out of the gun. So you've seen, I don't know if you've seen videos of people firing howitzers, but generally you see someone yanking a lanyard to set the whole thing in motion. And showtime. Well-trained US Army and Marine gun crews can fire 1 round every 12 to 14 seconds. Also, have a look at this gun's gunner, who is already checking his sights for the next fire mission. So that's this guy there. They've just fired one out and he's working out the next one. Now that you know how an M777 works, check out this video of a US Army M777 gun crew quickly firing 8 rounds. So here we go. We might as well check that out. so on and so forth. You get the idea, and it becomes like clockwork. Now the job for these guys is then scooting, like doing your shooting. Yep, you can. There they fire 8 rounds in two minutes or so. But actually, counter battery can hit you in 3 minutes. So it's how quickly these guys can get their M777 up and on the back of a truck, hooked to the back of a truck, and then out of there. And I showed you a video some time back of a Ukrainian M777 crew doing that in like super quick time. You know, quicker than some of these guys have learned. You know, they just had to perfect that to be able to get out there super quickly. And that's the advantage of your self-propelled howitzers that can just fire these from the base of a truck or some tracked vehicle. Fire however many rounds they can within sort of 3 minutes, and then just shoot off, scoot off out of there, and counter battery won't hit them. So there is a huge advantage to that kind of piece of equipment, which is why I think you're seeing a greater prevalence of those as time goes on in kind of warfare. Anyway, that's that. Hopefully, that was of use. Going through a bunch of these stuff. Sorry to start off saying I was going to talk about mortars, but actually, it's far more important to talk about the M777 to give you an idea of how the projectiles, the fuses on the projectiles, the charges, and the primers work. So there are different things going on there that will now give us a greater understanding when we look at mortars. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, for watching. Really appreciate that. Thank you for all your support. Thanks for all the members. You're wonderful people, and for all the super support that you all give the channel, or many of you give the channel. Some of you are here for trolling, and you know, why not? Really appreciate the conversations that go on down in threads. They are fantastic. I will hopefully get to you fairly soon. I've got one kind of extra that I want to play around with, which is a couple of the ISW produced a whole kind of separate report almost on how the Russians and the Russian propagandists are utilizing religion. It's not going to be about the truth or falsity of religion or whatever, any kind of philosophical look at that, but the utility it provides for, in this case, Russia to present their propaganda message, their narrative, so on and so forth. And there's a couple of pieces to feed into that. Really interesting stuff. So I'm going to do, but that rather than being an extra as parts of a smorgasbord of stuff, that will probably sit on its own as a separate video. But anyway, I'll work on that in the next couple of days and pump that one out. Anyway, in the meantime, thank you so much. Take care. Speak to you soon.